I think that's the feeling people have is when I'm really good at this, like it's almost like there's something else happening in how you can perceive that something's wrong. Is it your gut? Is it really it's data? But that doesn't work for people. They can't imagine it. And so now that we're in a place where you can actually simulate that, you can simulate what's going wrong, and you can actually do better than someone could have done, especially with us. If you imagine we're going into wells that are miles long and things are going wrong and we've interpreted it for years. Well, we don't need to interpret it. We can actually have the information, an instrument that you're playing that if you think it's a regular guitar without the electronics, a feeling that, well, it's just not the same. It's not the same feeling. People going back to listening to vinyl records, like it's there's things where it's not the same. Well, okay, but sometimes it's better.
The energy industry is transforming faster than ever. Automation, AI, and advanced drilling technology are reshaping how we power the world. Leading this charge is David Reid, CTO and CMO of NOV. From revolutionizing drilling systems to launching innovation accelerators, he's helping drive the next wave of energy technology. Today, we dive into what's next for the industry and the groundbreaking tech that's shaping its future. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you on, David. So you lead both the technology and marketing at NOV. I know you love this question. I mean, how do those two roles work together to drive innovation?
They don't.
They don't? Okay.
It's just a really bad idea. I always say that the C in CTO, CMO is for cheap.
Cheap?
It's a 2-for-1 special. No, they fit well because I've been in both spaces, but I've always leaned towards technology. But the marketing part works very well for preparing people for where you're going to be. So your messaging and what you're doing, you kind of know where you're going to be leading people towards. So it actually works well together. I like it. And I tend to get stuck in being too much of a futurist. So I have to kind of pull it back and balance it out. And I have a lot of really good people who work for me. Then that helps because I need a lot of balancing.
Well, and it often is like if someone's in marketing, there's like in tech, we always had something called the marketing requirements document. And that's what all the marketing guy put everything in there that you really desired to do. And then the engineer would have to come and say, okay, that sounds great, but we haven't quite figured out fusion reaction yet. Time travel. So we got to back some of those things out. So I guess it would help if you actually do, straddle the fence.
Yeah, it's made sense. I think if you described who I was, it would be both of those things. Is that I'm really in on what technology and where and why. So I tend to do well on the long-term stuff. And then I enjoy the communication part. And so the two go together pretty well, I think. If I look back, I kind of started as an architect, which is a bit of both. So you kind of get a bit of the technical, bit of the creative, and I like it.
I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs like about running businesses, because you do get to wear more than one hat. And so if you're a creative, then you get to do things on the marketing side. And then you have the engineering side, which is more technical. Well, NOV has been at the forefront of energy investments and high tech for quite a long time now. What maybe some recent innovation excites you the most?
I mean, I've always had the same base stuff that I like. I mean, so there's things happening now that I've dreamed of for years. And so that's sometimes sounds old to me because I've been trying to push it for about 5 or 10 years. So the robotics has been, we've made our own robots. My whole career, we worked on making our own machines. But we never went and used industrial machines, which we probably should have done a long time ago. But that's been fun to do. Just because it's such a well-developed product. And so applying it, learning how to use it's been fun.
Robotics, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And eliminating people. I think that's always been on my mind. And when we built the machines, you would build for high volume work. So you'd still have people in the mix. And so that was an economic decision that also was not that safe. And so that was inside of me was always this, we got to get people away from this place, you know.
Safety wise.
Yeah. And so I think in my first few years, I saw an iron roughneck, which gets people's hands away from drill pipe in a dangerous environment. And it took a while to make that a real product. And so that's the reality of products, is it takes time, as well as most people will tell you things aren't working because people are stupid, you know, and it's not true. It's usually that you're not, either the product's wrong, the messaging's wrong. And so that journey was really interesting. And so as we went into full systems, I've really enjoyed, so I run a drilling rig, and we took the cabin off, and that was, everyone was asking why. And for years I sat in automation conferences and people said, well, you don't get on an airplane and there's not a pilot. It's just too dangerous to not have someone there. And in my mind, I'm like, you don't go to a nuclear plant and you're sitting on top of the reactor also. You know, it just seemed a bit like, I don't know. If something could blow up, wouldn't you want to be somewhere else? So that's a long journey. But in the middle of it, there's, you know, if you know the Sheridan model, but the idea of moving towards more computer control, that journey has been a long part of my career. And so as we start to get into the systems being smart enough to make their own decisions, I think that's really fun. It's a really interesting space. Just kind of pushing that envelope and pushing it and seeing what's possible. And so the physical act of removing people from being able to go out and look at things or be involved causes you to need a lot more technology.
Is it all like remote telepresence style monitoring? Like the cabin was removed, but it's somewhere else? Or?
It's still there. Not a lot changed. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't that complex. For me, it was pretty easy. It wasn't until everyone was resisting it. And we're asking why. People aren't going to start doing this, are they? But as soon as someone went into a cabin with large HD screens and realized your visibility is better than it was, you have to get away from, you know, the eye-to-eye contact. There's things where you're like, okay, this won't work, but there's no one there.
It's interesting, right? I mean, isn't it a lot like I would much prefer watching a football game on TV than I do like in the stadium, because you can't see as well. Yeah. And the action is taking place at the other end of the field. Yeah, you can't see, did someone actually do something with the ball? Right. Right. But on the screen, you're getting play-by-plays and visibility and everything else.
And a lot of cameras. So it's an interesting experience people have where they realize this is actually feasible. Because if it's feasible, it's not that you should always be off of that floor. But there are moments where it's very dangerous. And in those moments, you want to know you didn't have to be there.
Well, obviously very important for safety, right? You know, people don't actually have to be in harm's way, then let's get them out of harm's way.
Right.
Also curious when you get resistance to that kind of thing sometimes, right? It's like, well, like you said, what was the reason? Were the reason just the comfort or factor, or this just was different enough to where like we've always done things this way, so we're not comfortable doing something in this new way that we're not really familiar with?
I think it's tactile feel and sound. And I mean, when people drill and they get used to reading things that, you know, they feel is particularly unique to the experiences. It's interesting because we're playing with that AI thing right now, which
that AI thing,
you know, that stuff, which I hate to say because we've been doing it a long time. It's not, people think it's a new thing, but we're the same. We've been doing it a long time, but more on the gen side, but just looking at sound performance with a motor, like someone does with their ear. You know, there's someone who's been doing this for a while, knows what that sound means. Now that's very easy stuff to suddenly go on your phone and say, if you have a phone, you can run up to any motor and you can listen to it and we'll tell you what's wrong. It's pretty cool. It's that things that were too hard to do. We tried this years ago, but it was too complex. The sounds were too complex. The environment was too complex. And I think that's the feeling people have is, you know, when I'm really good at this, like it seems like there's something else happening in how you can perceive that something's wrong. Is it your gut? Is it really it's data? But that doesn't work for people. They can't imagine it. And so now that we're in a place where you can actually simulate that, you can simulate what's going wrong, and you can actually do better than someone could have done, especially with us. If you imagine we're going into wells that are miles long and things are going wrong and we've interpreted it for years. well, we don't need to interpret it. We can actually have the information. And so that's kind of interesting. But the resistance does come from that, if an instrument that you're playing that if you think it's a regular guitar without the electronics or whatever it is, the feeling that, well, it's just not the same. It's not the same feeling. People going back to listening to vinyl records, like there's things where it's just it's not the same. Well, okay, but sometimes it's better.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can do things that are better, and I think that's the what I get very excited about, what changes, and I love creative destruction. And most people don't. Most people's natural response is, oh no, now what am I going to do? If that's my job. And I think that kind of revolution that we're in the middle of is a resetting of jobs and resetting of economics, and I'm kind of encouraged by all of it.
And how would you define creative destruction?
You can it's a historic term, but you can look at it as anything. Where if you look at cars and horse and buggies, whatever it would be, where technology comes along and suddenly the job you're doing is irrelevant. It's gone. And the history of it is really interesting, because where the world has got better is always where there's creative destruction. But in the destruction side, someone with wealth and power is losing that wealth and power. So most parts of the world don't encourage it. They encourage, let's keep in extractive systems where people have to make me rich, have to look after me. And so a lot of countries run that way. But history of Europe that led into North America, there was a lot of creative destruction, a lot of ability for people to have patents, which was one of the big things that changed the world, was that kings and leaders said, you can now own your ideas. Now, today, of course, you can own your ideas, but there was a time where you couldn't. You can own your own land. So that destroys the power and wealth of a system. But it creates middle class. It creates, it cleans up that gap between wealth and poverty, and it allows things to change in the world. And we're in that. That is the thing behind the why am I not comfortable with more robotics or more smart systems that seem like they're matching me.
Well, people find it hard to really get the feel for how that is going to be in the future.
Right.
And how is that actually going to look, and how is it going to affect me?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just taking away my job, or am I going to have something that my life is going to be better for it?
Right.
You have the analogies, like you said, with the horses, where there was a lot of people that built carriages and knew how to take care of horses and raised horses and sold horses, and all of a sudden you have the automobile. And so when you talk to people about probably the only people that are going to actually drive their own car might be rich people, and they're going to drive it for fun, right? And you're like, well, that'll never happen. He's like, well, no, if you look at history, it actually did happen. If you told someone back then, the only people that would have horses would be rich people, and they'd drive them for fun. You'd be like, what are you talking about? This is our whole life.
And it was the industrial revolutions and the Luddites who just believed that this is really bad. It got violent, started to burn down houses.
But it opens up other opportunities where, we're going to be safer. You're going to get in a car and you're just going to drive, and it's going to drive better.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I'm always cursing at the other drivers. No one knows how to drive in this city except for me, of course, but it's going to improve safety. And, there are risks, there are things that happen. And on that journey, that's part of my experience, is bringing in new technology always has this really kind of hard beginning. Mm-hmm. And how everyone remembers that, how does that work with, your line of business? There is a lot of tradition, right?
Very much.
And the times that I've tried, in the past, approach some of the oil and gas companies, they're fine with the way things were done in the past, right?
Or they love it. They have a, I find it now, people ask, so I have a long history. I was very much involved in all of the design of the offshore drilling rigs that we have today. But I don't talk about it a lot for that reason, because I remember how alienating that feels when people are coming with new ideas and people seem to know everything. But it's been an interesting journey. One thing I learned to like was how connected to equipment and systems and how we do things. People were. It was bizarre. I mean, people are literally loving machines.
Well, besides technology, I know you're also passionate about, leadership and mentorship. Maybe you have a lesson learned in that area that you could share.
Gosh, that's a big subject. Because I teach leadership a lot. I do it in my nonprofit, and I've done it inside the company. And so I do think it's a pretty simple approach for people, but it's always the same thing that people need to discover themselves first. And in most leadership, they teach you how to package yourself, which is very external. And so I tend to go deep with people on who are you, how do you work, how do you function, what messages do you get at home, which is something people don't usually ask, but it's the important messages. People who know you well can describe you. What do your friends say? And that information is critical for developing who you are, then how you fit inside of your teams and in your family. And I like family systems in general. I think if you use family systems, they're really helpful. And
so
then
it's more of a one-on-one approach then. It's not one size fits all. You're actually going to...
No, I do large classes in that same thing because you let people take the journey. You just give them the information.
Right.
So go do the work on this. Go work out who you are. Go work out how do you tick. And most people have not done that work. I mean, the worst, especially if you have leadership skills, the worst thing that can happen is, there you go, be a leader. You will be a bad leader. You'll be the person you are, as opposed to the person you need to be to lead well. And that homework is literally at home. And if you're not doing that homework, you'll just be that same person. And so you have to move. You have to keep moving jobs, or because you're actually thinking everyone else is failing when really probably you're failing.
Can anybody be a leader?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think everyone is a leader fundamentally because there is one follower, which is you, and you're doing everything that you say. So at least there's something in everyone where there's a bit of leadership experience. But I don't know. I think everyone has a talent, and I really like that. I like finding out superpowers. I'm a big believer that everyone has something they do that is wildly unique. And I like that journey. Whether it's a leader or not, doesn't matter,
Well, you might find out if you're going through that type of course that, hey, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
Right. I don't really have that, or I don't feel like I really want to go down that path. Not everybody has to be a leader. You've done a large amount of volunteer work. Yeah. And you've even founded organizations. Tell me a little bit about your passion projects there.
Yeah, well, redM is probably, I had a lot of responsibility in the company, and it got cut back, and it was a really hard day in my career. And I had to decide, okay, and so if you can look at things as a victim and go, oh no, something bad happened. But I didn't. I kind of went, I've got capacity. That's interesting. I wonder what that's for. And so I started doing other things because I had a lot more space in my schedule. And I wasn't trying to find it. It's just I saw a need. I went on a board for a nonprofit that takes care of survivors of sex trafficking. And I was like, as soon as I got on the board, I was like, oh, this is hard. Like these people, I mean, the work is hard, but nonprofits are really hard. Like they need a lot of money. And I didn't like how they were doing it, but I have no control of these people. So I thought, I'll go out first with marketing. And I went to LinkedIn and said, who wants to help? Here's the problem. I need a bunch of people. Overnight, there was 57,000 views of that post. And I was like, oh,
might be onto something. Yeah, right.
So someone called me and goes, this is a big deal. And I went, yeah, seems like it. And so we gathered people together, a bunch of strangers. And my kind of natural leadership, I just kind of sat in the room and looked at people. We set them up and we said, okay, give us some ideas. We built teams. We just went down the road. And so for a year, we helped this organization. We rebranded them. We built a gala event for them. It was all good. We burned a lot of people out. And that's when I was like, I know this is not good. So I continued for years because everyone wanted to keep going. So for about 3 years.
And this is the redM?
This is redM, yeah. So originally the organization we helped was called Redeemed, and we were doing marketing. So redM was, I learned redeemed, too religious a word. People get turned off by that. And then just a short name is better for just getting people to connect in. We learned also that people who were trying to communicate about human trafficking, if you use the words human trafficking or images, you lose people. And so it kind of became this tidy word. And then as we went on, we converted it kind of an acronym for Resource Empower and Develop Movement. And so I think for 3 years, I was just coasting it. I found it easy to grow and build organizations. And I had some good friends who give me hard information about myself all the time, who came back and kind of were like, we think it's time for you to do more of this. And I was like, all right, I'll give that a shot. And so I started to push a bit harder on redM, and it just went wild. I mean, we're about 4,000 people doing volunteer work in Houston for redM.
Wow.
We're in 7 cities now.
It's impactful.
We did 90 events last year.
It's crazy that it's a problem at all. I mean, it's hard to get your head around.
It is, but that's the main job. The main job is to get people to understand it could be your kids.
The depths, yeah.
There are a lot of good strategic work on how do you get to people to understand, because it's an extremely large organization. So that we're fighting against. They think it's about a $300 billion business. And most of their work in the US is hiding. It's making sure it looks like something else. This looks like a runaway kid, or this, they use online to get to kids. Parents don't have the first idea. It looks like a kid going the wrong way, but it's not, it's trafficking. And so when we actually go and explain to people, this is what grooming looks like. And every time we do, sometimes, sometimes it's a couple people, but this sounds like my kid. 100% of the cases, it was traffickers. So we were onto something. So we've seen 30 kids that we've stopped from going into being trafficked. And then if we lose a kid, like someone, oh, my kid's lost, I don't know where they are, the police will say, wait 2 days. And with our private investigator, we've found kids within 24 hours. And so...
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so we're able to do something, but it's how do you get to people who don't want to hear the message? They think it's either a kid in Europe on holiday getting grabbed, like by Liam Neeson, with Liam Neeson rescuing. Sorry, and so that image, and then Pretty Woman, that prostitution is somehow something that a young girl wishes to do. They don't understand it's children often. So there's clearing up all of those myths and getting people to understand it's here, it's around us, it's large. It's not just, we have about 80% of rescues are American born. So people are like, oh, it's a border thing. Well, sure, there's a border issue, but it's so big. They're reaching in through the internet towards your kids, and they've got lots of strategies, but...
Well, kudos to you for making a difference there.
Yeah, we've been in that space about 15 years now. So, but redM was about 7 years ago. My wife started, and then once she convinced me to go on the board of this organization, I was like, okay.
You leaned in.
I think at first I'm like, there's a problem, I can solve it. But it took a few years before I realized I love doing this. I love pulling people together. I love the marketing work of how do you get to people. We're working on an ad campaign that will go across the US. We're aiming at Super Bowl and World Cup, and those things are coming, they're coming our way. So it's, we've made 4 films. We've made 2 films already. We're filming another 2, which will be ads that will look like you're watching a movie. And they have this twist on them where you suddenly go, oh my goodness, I'm grabbed, and this is real and it's happening. And so, very, very effective. So yeah, that's a fun side gig.
Yeah. At Softtech, we don't just follow the trends, we set them. As the founder and CEO, I've built a team that excels in delivering cutting-edge solutions in software, hardware, and IoT. From concept to completion, we're the partner that turns your tech dreams into reality. Softtech, where innovation starts. So, the energy transition is a major conversation today, right? So, how do you see NOV's role in, that sustainable future?
it's easier than most who are coming out of oil and gas into other things because we make things. So it's not the type of skills that everyone's like, how do you develop the skills? Well, what are those skills? Are they electronics and big steel and, equipment? And so, yeah, we kind of have a kind of three different areas we think of. One is how do you take what's existing oil and gas and just bring it to a better efficiency, lower carbon footprint. Tons of stuff we've done in that space. It's a lot of fun. Then there's a really cool middle ground where you're like, what have we done in oil and gas that they actually need? And so a lot of that too. So big businesses in like installation vessels, which are just jackups, which are the same thing we use for drilling. So the floating part is really interesting too. I was just in Scotland working on a very large field of semi-submersibles. It'll be the biggest construction job we've seen in the history of mankind.
What is a semi-submersible?
So it's a floating drilling, normally it's a floating drilling rig. And to stabilize it, it kind of has on pontoons. You fill it with a bit of water and it gets it under the water. And that allows you to stabilize not on top of the waves. So that same idea. So if you think in oil and gas right now, there's maybe 90 semi-submersibles, which have been built over many years, maybe a 20-year period.
Which are like the traditional oil rigs that are out in the Gulf?
They're floating, yeah. Not the fixed ones, but yeah, for when you get deeper, they're floating. So if there's 90 of those, our first job in doing that with wind towers, it looks like about 210 semi-submersibles. That's the first one. Scotland's planning on about 3,000 of those. Never heard of that size of manufacturing and build. And so pretty interesting. We make things. So we have vessel design. We have components that go in there. We're one of the biggest fiberglass companies. So there's a bunch of fiberglass that's needed on there. And then there's mooring systems. So things that we know. So there are things in the middle there where this is the same technology. Geothermal is perfect for that. We've been solving problems there. So we like that. And then there's the whole what's in the full-on renewable hasn't been done before. So wind towers, we actually, there's a process we do with large tanks for fiberglass where we send the factory out and basically you're printing this thing. It's like 3D.
At the location?
Yes, as opposed to carrying a giant tank around the world. Don't do that. Send the plant there. And so we're doing the same thing for larger wind towers.
So basically taking the technology that you developed or had built before for semi-submersible oil rigs and applying it to things like a semi-submersible
for wind. Right. And in the North Sea where there's tons of wind.
Interesting.
And so, and then there's the invent for the business that's something that doesn't exist, or biogas. We're already in biogas, but there's things over here where it's like this needs an invention.
Yeah.
And when we studied the wind towers on land, we learned one of the big problems they have is it's windy. Who knew? And so when you look at their cost model, what's really hurting them is traditional cranes.
Oh, really?
Because it's windy. So, let's wait till the wind stops. So literally that's a big cost. And so we actually designed a different crane that can be used and can withstand high winds and do high tower building. Simple, but no one had thought of it. So often in these spaces we played around a lot with solar. Solar just didn't have the margin to be fun. Too many people playing in it. It was a lot of good, and we had some good solutions for them.
So wind and geothermal is where you're looking.
Those are where we're finding there's money. If I'm on stage in those environments and people ask, what's unique about your renewable work, what's unique is we make money.
Okay.
No one else is really. They're trying to stay alive. So we find places where we can add value, and usually it's got to be technology. I mean, when we first went to geothermal, and they were using traditional old bits, and we said, well, why don't you use the new tech? Well, we can't afford the new technology. Well, just try it. So they tried it, and they were 65% faster.
Wow.
Big deal. They were basically, the whole industry suddenly moved to, we can't not use these. And so great move for us. And they were working on, if we want to go in this hot temperature, but we want to have smart systems, we're going to have to make really high temperature electronics. And we one day just went, well, what if it wasn't hot? Well, what it is, I know, but what if we run cold fluids, we start to put a thermal coating in the pipe? What if we do that and then it's actually cool and you're jetting out cold fluid into hot rock? Well, then the rock breaks even easier. Yeah. Yeah, it does. Like, it's kind of cool, and you can still run the electronics. And
innovation.
It always seems a bit simple, but they're all people who are like, oh no, we don't want to be spending money on this.
Interesting.
So that's why you aim at where's their cost pain, if you can understand their cost pain, and you can. So 65% improvement changes a lot of things in hot rock, because time is not your friend either. So if you can move faster, that's a good thing. So I think that's where in the transition, it's fun for us because we've got our existing business. We got this kind of, in between stuff where we're bringing tech over, and then we got the invention. So we have a lot of fun with it. It's a good space. There's still more. We're playing with nuclear quite a bit just because I think there's still room there, and there's going to be, as we look at.
It's really the ultimate clean energy, right?
It is. Yeah. It's and the tech has moved on for years, but not everybody paid attention because it has that word nuclear that makes them feel nervous. But it's really moved on. It's very exciting. So we're doing some SMR stuff, and
we live in the future.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we could talk for another couple of hours, but I appreciate you coming on and filling us in on what you're doing at NOV. I do have some sauce for you, of course.
Of course.
These are circuit-based, actually,
I thought you
so
said
it's technology.
Socks. I'm glad it's
sauce.
socks.
Hot sauce. No, hot socks, but thanks for coming on the show, David.
Thank you.
I know how important staying informed is for innovation and growth. The Forging the Future newsletter brings you the best in tech trends, startup advice, and industry insights. Join our community and forge your future with us. Subscribe now.